Patch 13.17 is upon us with some nerfs, some buffs, many adjustments and many item changes too. Starting with nerfs, we have Kayn, who is losing 5 flat damage and 20% AD scaling on his W. However, he does now heal to full upon transforming. Next we have K6, who is losing 5% AD scaling on his Q. Following this we have Kindred, whose E is getting its execute damage decreased and the slow is being massively decreased to 30%. Next we have Neferi, who is losing 15 base health, the mini wolves don't spawn as often and they take bonus damage from melee attacks. In addition, her Q now deals less flat damage and heals less, and her E is losing AD scaling on the dash and on the circular attack. And the final nerf goes to Xerath, who is losing a large amount of base mana regen, and his W will now cost 10 additional flat mana. However, his passive will now have its cooldown reduced by 2.5 seconds on unit kill. The first buff goes to Elise, whose spider passive on hit damage and healing is increased, and her human form's E cocoon will now stun for longer as it's leveled. Next we have Gnar, who when in mega form, his Q and his W will both deal a large amount more flat damage. Following this we have Lux with mid lane buffs. She is losing a chunk of base mana regen and her E is losing 5 flat damage. However, her passive will now deal 10 more damage and her Q will have a lower cooldown as it's leveled. Next, Orianna will be getting 5 additional health per level and her W will deal a good amount more flat damage. Following this, Samira is gaining 30 additional flat health. Next, Twisted Fate's Q will now scale 10% better with AP. And following this, Vex's Q will now deal an additional 10 flat damage and her W will have a lower cooldown before it's fully leveled. And the final buff goes to Zoe, who is gaining 1 additional base health regen and her E will always reduce magic resist by 30%. We also have a large amount of adjustments starting with Aatrox, whose passive and W will now deal magic damage instead. Next we have Akshan, who is getting increased health and armor growth but losing AD growth instead. Following this we have Blitz, who is being truly gutted as a jungler, where he is gaining both health and magic resist but losing attack speed. His passive shield will be stronger early and weaker later. The W costs less mana but grants less attack speed. The E deals additional bonus AD, costs less mana and no longer deals bonus damage to non-champions. And his passive now scales with maximum mana. Next we have Hecarim, who is gaining 3 flat mana, 0.5 mana regen and 0.2 mana regen growth per level. However, in response he's losing 20 mana growth per level. In addition, his Q costs less mana as it's leveled and his W now also costs less mana as it's leveled but will heal less. Following this we have Quinn, who is gaining 8 health per level, however her Q and W is losing flat damage as it's leveled. Next we have Tryndamere, who is gaining 50 attack range but losing 4 attack damage. Following this we have Vi, whose passive will now provide a larger shield, her W reduces the passive's cooldown faster and her E has a smaller cooldown early game. However, in response her ultimate will now scale less well with AD. And the final changes goes to Xin, whose healing will now scale with max health rather than flat amounts. We also have many item changes, starting with BT, where you only get the bonus AD over 70% health. Duskblade's passive will now make you untargetable but no longer invulnerable, but will destroy projectiles when triggered. Even Shroud is getting a massive nerf with the amped damage now going down to 7%. Gore Drinker now grants 400 health. Shield Bow now grants a larger shield in the early game. Shojin grants 5 less AD and 150 more health. Shiv's AP scaling versus champions is decreased. And Stridebreaker now grants 75 more health. And finally, Futures Market will now grant less gold early but scale faster.